Hello and welcome back, guys. We're now starting a new story, Izuku's Guide to Fantastical Botany, by Micmager. You can find author's profile link in the description. Let's begin Chapter 1, The Truth Comes Out and Getting Away. Inko Midoriya considered herself a good mother. She did her best to provide for and care for her wonderful bundle of joy and ray of sunshine Izuku, even if part of her still feels extreme guilt about how she handled his quirkless diagnosis. She knew that she didn't tell her son what he needed, to hear, but she couldn't bring herself to tell him he could be a hero without a quirk. Deep down, on some logical level, she knew it was possible but didn't want her baby boy to go through what he would have to in order to achieve it. She would rather keep him safe and help him find a new dream and find friends to grow up happy with before eventually finding a great partner and giving her as many adorable grandbabies as possible. Izuku's safety was always her number one concern. Which is why she was currently livid and standing outside her best friend's home trying to calm down before she started doing anything beyond talking. Several minutes later, anger sufficiently reined in and breathing evened as much as she thought currently possible, Inko firmly knocked on the front door. She couldn't hold back the exasperated sign and the small upward twitch of her lips as she heard her best friend yelling at someone to get the door. Her small smile was instantly wiped away when she heard a child screaming back to his mother that he would get the door. Inko forced herself to crush the spike of anger that had ambushed her at the child's voice just in time before the door was yanked open and a small child with spiky blonde hair looked at her with a smile and greeted her with his usual, "Hey Auntie Inko." Fighting every urge to shout at the boy in front of her to never call her that again, she managed to respond with a measured, "Hello Katsuki, are your parents both home?" The old man and the hag are sitting on the couch, working on some new shirt design or something. Katsuki managed to shout out as he was running back to his room, task evidently considered completed. Normally Inko would have chuckled at the boy's energy by today, it could only annoy her when she realized he couldn't be bothered to invite her in. Briefly stopping to deposit her shoes at the door and slide on her personal slippers the Bakuga family kept at the door for her, Inko stepped in and closed the door behind her before making her way to the living room. Rounding the corner of the hallway she was able to see the back of her friend and her husband's heads leaning over the coffee table poring over a large sketch pad. The blonde woman raised her head and on seeing Inko her face split into a familiar slightly feral grin. "Inko. Come, we were just looking over the sketches for the new fall lineup this year. What brings you over and do you want some tea?" "Hello Mitsuki. Masaru. Some tea would be great. Preferably something calming as I believe we're going to need it." Inko managed with a genuine but subdued smile. "I'm afraid I didn't come with good news today." The man, Masaru, took a deep breath and moved to the kitchen to pour them all a cup of his favorite tea that always calmed he and his wife and Inko had always enjoyed. Mitsuki quickly put away the designs and the other paperwork, managing to sit down just as her husband was returning with the tea. Both Bakugas focused on Inko for several awkward seconds before Mitsuki broke the silence. "What happened? Is this about Izuku? Is he okay?" Inko took a sip of her tea and gave an appreciative sigh as she reached into her handbag to pull out a small data card. "I have something for you to watch, Katsuki should be here to watch it with us. Izuku is fine, he's resting right now." Relief filled the faces of her two friends before Masaru gained an exasperated look. "Katsuki did something again, didn't he?" Inko could only reply with a nod and a curt, "Indeed." A weary sign escaped her best friend's lips followed by a loud, "Brat. Get in here." Fast footsteps sounded as the child in question appeared in the room shouting back his reply, "What do you want Hag?" Mitsuki didn't get a chance to reply as Katsuki was picked up and placed on the couch between his parents by a very unimpressed father. "Sit down Katsuki." The tone in his father's voice froze the boy in place. Dread already starting to settle into the young boy's mind. Inko nodded in approval as she inserted the data card into the large TV and used the remote to navigate to the only video available before hitting play and sitting back in her chair, leaning forward, and glaring at the screen with her hands clenched tightly in her lap. The three Bakugas began watching with rapt attention, but very quickly all three grew incredibly different facial expressions as soon as the camera focused on the playground showing four children, one running from the other three. The picture quality being good enough to clearly make out the faces of all 4 kids, one being absolutely terrified and the other 3 sporting what could only be described as sadistic grins. Katsuki and his parents watched on as the on-screen Katsuki tackled the child none of them recognized to the ground where he and 2 of his friends started beating the child. His parents' horrified expressions only got worse when they started hearing the all too familiar popping sounds as the Katsuki on screen started weaving in his explosions between punches. Then they heard him berate the boy by asking if he still thought his quirk was cooler than Katsuki's own. Inko noticed the 2 parents begin to round on the child between them and decided to cough to get their attention. The video isn't over. It gets worse, she muttered with a scowl deepening every second when she and everyone else noticed a boy with unruly green hair run into the frame and place himself between the 2 sides. No. Mitsuki pleaded. Yes. Inko grumbled as the 3 adults watched Izuku throw his arms out to shield the 4th child from view. Kaachan, stop. You've already won, you're making him cry. Why are you being so mean? Shut up, stupid Deku. I'm showing this extra his place. He was looking down on me, saying his quirk was better than mine. Now get out of my way so I can make sure he learns his lesson. And no, Kaachan. If you don't stop I'll have to stop you myself. So the worthless Deku wants to play hero, huh? I guess we'll have to remind you of your place too. Stupid. Worthless. Quirkless. Defenseless. DKU. The 3 adults then watched in a combination of horror, disgust, concern, and anger as the Katsuki on screen and his 2 lackeys brutally beat Izuku for the next 10 minutes, screaming obscenities and insults at him the entire time. After what seemed like forever to the adults, the on-screen Katsuki got up and told his followers they were done showing this piece of SHT loser his place and they walked off screen. The video continued playing, being fast-forwarded now by roughly 2 hours before Izuku began moving again, trying in vain for several minutes to get up, looking around confused before a sad look passed over his face and he stumbled off screen in the direction everyone present recognized as his home. I'm leaving this copy with you. I've decided to move Izuku far away from here to try to find him a safe place to learn and grow. I just wanted to make sure you saw what Katsuki did and to tell you that he is not allowed anywhere near Izuku in the future if he can't learn to be a better person. If I catch him interacting with Izuku again before he makes significant changes, I will be speaking to the police and getting a formal restraining order. I still want to continue speaking with you too as we always have, but it will be over the phone, and until I feel my son is safe I won't be telling you where we live. Thank you for the tea. Goodbye. Inko stood and left the room, putting her shoes back on and leaving the Bakugo residence without looking back. 3 days later, Izuku's POV. When Izuku could feel himself starting to wake up, it was to a strange beeping sound on his left. He tried to open his eyes but found them feeling crusty, like when he slept too long and had the bits of eye gunk but all over his eyes. Reaching up to try to wipe some of the stuff away, he felt something like a plastic rope tangled on his right arm. It took some effort, but he managed to clear the crusty stuff away enough to open his eyes to see that he was in a strange room with several machines, and the plastic rope was actually a tube running from his arm to a bag of something that looked like water hanging on what looked like a metal coat rack. Taking in more of the room, he saw a cup and a pitcher of water on the small table to his right, which seemed to remind his mouth that it was dry. Just as he was going to try reaching for the cup, the door opened and an older woman in a white work uniform that he remembered seeing his school nurse wear, so he guessed that she was also a nurse, but he didn't get a chance to ask her before she noticed him looking at her and she gave him a reassuring smile. You're awake. That's great, we thought it might take another day or so. Let me go get the doctor and call your mother in, okay? I'll just help you get some water first. At the mention of his mother, Izuku perked up, taking the cup from the lady and watching her leave the room again. He barely had time to raise the cup to his lips before his mom burst into the room and ran towards him. Izuku briefly worried that she would knock the cup out of his hands when she would wrap him up in one of her hugs that always made him think that she must have a minor strength quirk when his mom surprised him by stopping mid-lunge. The look of confusion and surprise in her eyes was all it took to let Izuku know that she didn't stop herself. Izuku heard a loud sigh and turned his head to see the same nurse from before, but the sleeves of her uniform were wrapped around his mother's waist, stopping her from crushing him in the expected hug. Miss Midoriya. I can't let you hurt our patient any more than he already is, nor can I let you rip his fore out with what was clearly an overzealous hug. He heard his mother let out a short squeak before the nurse continued, voice laden with affectionate teasing, now, I'm going to let you go, but you cannot jump on him again, and no hugs while I go get the doctor. Izuku watched his mother make the same face he makes when he gets caught doing something bad and lets out a small giggle, noticing again how dry his mouth and throat are. He takes a sip of water while the nurse leaves the room again to find the doctor. He sees his mother reaching forward and running her hand through his hair in what he knows is her way of comforting them both, so he leans into the touch while they wait. The door opens and a man walked in wearing something like he remembered the Quirk doctor wearing from 2 years ago, so he thinks this is probably the doctor the nice lady talked about. Hello Miss Midoriya, little Izuku, I am Dr. Tsuchikawa. I was the leading physician in charge of Izuku's treatment during his stay here in Muzutafu Pediatric Care, and I'm here to check on the little guy now that he's awake to make sure that everything is okay. The doctor spent the next 15 minutes looking over Izuku and the machines in the room and giving his mom a calming look. Little Izuku is going to be fine. He's going to be bruised for a few days, possibly up to a week and a half, and he's going to have burn marks on him for a while, but he'll make a full recovery very soon. Izuku could see his mom's shoulders relax at the news, and she thanked the doctor as he left the room. She turned to him and gave him a look that he'd only seen a few times in the past when he'd done something he wasn't supposed to, and she wanted answers. Izuku, there are several questions I want to ask you, but I need to bring in a guest before I do. I'll be right back, sit tight and don't try to get up. He watched his mom walk quickly out of the room and return shortly, followed by a tall man with a plain face, short black hair, and kind eyes, wearing a long brown trench coat. Hello Izuku, I am Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. I'm here to have you answer a couple of questions for us about how you ended up here. Don't worry, you aren't in trouble. I've already seen the footage of what happened in the playground, I just need to clarify a few things with you. Izuku began to tremble when he heard the word detective, but when the man finished talking he had calmed down a lot. Oh okay, I'll try to answer. The detective gave him a nod. Excellent. Now I need to know what started that fight with the other 4 children. Izuku rapidly rocked his head back and forth and took a deep breath. Kaachan heard Kumataru-kun say that he had the coolest quirk in the class now, and he didn't like that, so when school let out he chased Kumataru-kun to the playground and started hitting him. The detective nodded again. Why do you think the little Bakugo boy reacted that way? He is always reminding people that he has the coolest quirk in school. The teachers have always said so, and they're right. His quirk is super cool and would be really useful as a hero. The teachers said so. Yes. The teachers have always told Kaachan that he's definitely going to become a top hero with his super cool flashy quirk. That's what everyone is always telling Kaachan. Why does he call you Deku? Izuku froze at this question for several seconds, and his head jerkily swung towards his mom, who looked him in the eye and told him to be honest with the detective. He calls me that because it means, someone who can't do anything, to remind me that I'm useless and can't do anything right. He could see his mom shaking in the chair next to his bed and watched her hands curl into tight ball. Do your teachers know what he calls you and why? Everyone calls me Deku. Even the TT teachers. Now he could see the detective's eyes squint, and what he could tell was anger played across his face before he could get his expression back to what it was, but failing to stop the vein visibly throbbing on his left temple. Your teachers tell you that you're useless. Everyone says that I'm a useless quirkless freak. Do the other kids bully you too, or is it just Bakugo? Kaachan doesn't bully me, he's my friend. He practically screamed his last answer and was breathing heavily now, tears welling at the corner of his eyes. Just as he could tell he was going to start panicking, his mom patted his hand to get his attention. Izuku sweetie, Katsuki is not your friend. Friends don't treat each other the way he treats you. Friends don't hurt each other and not check on you to make sure you're okay. Katsuki is a bully and his parents know about it now. Izuku wanted to defend Kaachan again, he really did, but the look in his mom's eyes was telling him that she wouldn't listen to him try to speak up for his old friend again, so he looked back at the detective, intent on getting the rest of the questions over with. The other kids all treat me badly. They all say mean things and hit me and use me to practice their quirks. They take my stuff and hide it or break it. They take my lunch and eat it in front of me or throw it in the trash while I watch. This time the detective didn't bother hiding his displeasure, rage and disgust plain on his face. Do your teachers ever stop this from happening? No. They ignore it or say that it's good to get practice in early for your quirk so that you can use it better when you're older. Both adults stood up with what Izuku could only see as horror on their faces, like when he watched that scary movie with Kaachan that one time and had nightmares for weeks after it. His mother began to cry and ask him why he never told her, and he started crying too while trying to say that he didn't want to worry her. Detective Tsukachi paced the room a few times waiting for the crying to stop, and when it finally started to die down he handed Izuku a notebook and a pen and asked him to write down in as much detail as possible what has been done to him and by who, paying special attention to what the teachers around him have said and done. Then he apologized and walked out of the room with his mom to ask her a few more questions. Izuku had too many thoughts and emotions going through his head right now. He didn't want to get anyone in trouble, he didn't want to cause any trouble, and he really didn't want to make his mom worry, but he was also tired of the bullying and wanted to hope that maybe things could finally be better. Eyes set in a determined glare normally only reserved for when he is looking for new All Might merchandise, Izuku began to write and write and write, providing every detail he could remember of all of the bullying he had received for the last 2 years after his quirkless diagnosis was revealed to the class by his mean teachers. I hope this changes something. Chapter 2, Space Machis and Quirky Revelations. Inko followed the detective out of the room, doing everything in her power to hold back the waterfall of tears threatening to pour out onto the floor in an attempt to hide her distress at the situation from her, now admitted, chronically tormented son. Fists clenching hard enough to leave her knuckles white, she struggled to sort through the acts committed by the children and adults against her little boy. Special attention being paid to memorizing the names of the Targ former teachers who not only allowed the bullying to happen but actually participated in the acts. She knew they would pay for this, just wasn't sure to what extent yet. So many ideas flew through her mind that she unknowingly began muttering, not quite to the speed her son was capable of but still not comprehensible to anyone without a quirk that could play back sounds at reduced speed. Mrs. Midoriya. Inko's head snapped to the detective and replied on reflex. Just Miss Midoriya or Inko, please. Is there anything you need from me, detective? My apologies, but yes, once we get the notes from your son we will need to discuss legal options unless you do not want to press charges. Inko could practically taste the tone of judgment in the last bit of what the detective said and smirked. Detective. I will be pursuing all involved adult parties as far as the law allows. I welcome any help you, your precinct, or any legal aid you want to recommend would be willing to give. Children, especially as young as those wrapped up in this, cannot be blamed. The teachers, faculty, and parents of the most egregious, however, they will be held accountable. Inko couldn't remember ever being this angry, not even when she found her ex-husband in bed with another woman. Noticing a few dust particles beginning to gather and form indistinct shapes around her, she shook herself out of that line of thinking and continued. I just need to find another place to live, preferably far away from his tormentors. I've wanted to get out of the city for a while, maybe I'll look into getting us a place out in the countryside. Tsukachi reached up and grabbed his chin in thought for a moment before snapping his fingers, startling Inko out of her muttering trance. Sorry Miss Midoriya, I just remembered a colleague of mine moved here from the Mie Prefecture, said it was a peaceful area with no quirk discrimination allowed in the schools, says it helped a lot because of his mutations to be able to grow up without dealing with the ridicule most mutant types go through. Something to look into if you don't have somewhere else in mind already. The young detective smiled at the look of gratitude Inko was giving him as the door opened and Izuku stood in the doorway holding the notebook in his arm while dragging the four-stand along. Resigning herself to having to explain to her son why he didn't need to bring the notebook to them and risk hurting himself, the little ray of sunshine told her he didn't want them to have to come and get it themselves. Inko took the notebook from him and handed it to the detective so she could help Izuku back into bed. She could hear the detective going through the pages and periodically grunting in obvious dissatisfaction. Turning around when she heard the man clear his throat, she was handed the notes and told to read a section about one of the teachers Izuku had written about and couldn't stop the look of unbridled rage that took over her face. She handed the book back to the detective, confirmed he didn't need them for anything else and saw him to the door, thanking him for his time and giving him her number for any follow-ups before turning back to Izuku and tucking him in. Her poor boy must have been exhausted because he fell asleep in a couple of minutes, while she began researching the Mie Prefecture. It was a full 2 weeks later that the doctors cleared Izuku with a clean bill of health and allowed him to check out. Inko had gone with the nurse to complete the paperwork when the doctor flagged her down at the nurse's station for a chat. "Miss Midoriya, I am glad to see Izuku well and bouncing around again. I just wanted to make sure you knew that he is at the age where you need to register his quirk so that the authorities do not come looking for you. I'm not sure why you haven't registered his quirk as of yet, but I understand that sometimes life gets hectic and certain things can fall to the wayside, but this is a legal matter that shouldn't be put off anymore. I can help you start the paperwork if you'd like before you leave, if you wouldn't mind coming to my office and describing his quirk to me," the doctor said while maintaining his professional smile, trying his hardest not to judge the young mother for leaving this for so long. Inko, on the other hand, was stuck between being confused and angry at this man for his callous remarks, and before she could rein in her temper she lashed out, screeching at the top of her lungs, "How dare you! It's bad enough that my son has to be berated, ostracized and beaten by everyone around him just because he's quirkless, but now you want to throw salt on an open wound. Where do you get off picking on a 6-year-old who just spent 2 weeks in the hospital after being beaten nearly to death just because he doesn't have a quirk?" Anyone who wasn't already paying attention to the nurse's station before definitely was now, torn between looking at the clearly irate mother with a manic look in her eyes and what seems like a quirkist doctor who is white as a sheet and clearly surprised by the response. "Ma'am. Please stop yelling. I am not picking on your son," the doctor said, waving his arms frantically in front of his face, trying to calm the woman whose eyes had begun to glow a neon green and paperclips had started floating across the nurse's station. "Please, let me explain. I don't know what you're talking about. Your son isn't quirkless." Inko reeled back, eyes losing their glow, stationery falling back to their places on the desk beside her without her realizing she had ever grabbed it with her quirk in the first place, the shock on her face plain for everyone in the room to see. She tried responding for several seconds but only managed to sputter out a slightly coherent, "www what?" She grabbed the counter beside her to prevent herself from fainting like she knew she was about to do, and managed to take several deep breaths while several medical staff surrounded her, making sure she was all right. After the head nurse checked her eyes, she waved everyone off with a polite bow and looked at the doctor, standing ramrod straight with sweat pouring off of himself, and eyes clenched shut as if readying himself for her to maim him for the perceived slight against her son. Regathering herself, she moved closer to the man and lowered her voice, "Would you mind talking to me about this in a more private area? I would like more information and don't want people staring at me if I come close to fainting again," she said, watching the man's eyes shoot open with what could possibly have been the most relieved expression she'd ever seen on his face as his whole body relaxed and he let out a breath she could tell he didn't know he was holding. "Right this way, ma'am, let's step into my office so we can go over the details." The doctor hurriedly placated and walked her to his office before shutting the door. The doctor offered her a cup of tea, which Inko politely declined in favor of getting to the point while he shuffled around to his seat. "So, there seems to have been either a mix-up or a misdiagnosis involving your son's quirk status. Could you please explain to me what you were told so I can try to fix this?" the doctor said while steepling his fingers and adopting what he hoped was a calm look on his definitely not panicking face while he stared at the terrifying Mon's concerned mother sitting across his desk from him. "Our family doctor told us 2 years ago that Izuku was quirkless and showed us an x-ray wherein he pointed out the extra toe joint on Izuku's feet and said that if he had the toe joint he was quirkless and should give up hope of ever manifesting his quirk or becoming a hero, traumatizing my son for the next 2 years of his life. Since then we have heard nothing else from the doctor's office other than a notice that he had moved away from the city a few months ago and was no longer practicing medicine." Inko relayed with what the doctor could tell was an explanation she'd had to give more than once before. She sighed and continued, "Izuku has suffered so much since then. His friends in preschool, his teachers who were watching over the kids, now into primary school he's getting the same treatment but worse. Everyone around him save for myself has turned on him and treated him horribly. I just recently found out that the child Izuku considered his best friend, closer than a brother to him, has been physically beating him, mentally tearing him apart, and using him as quirk target. Practiced the entire time. Now you tell me that he has a quirk, I don't know what to think about this. She began taking several calming breaths, eyes closed, almost entirely forgetting the other occupant of the room until he spoke up. Miss Midoriya, I am sorry that this has happened to your son, but I need to clear up a few things. First, your son does have a quirk, his BLD tests came back positive for the quirk gene. Second, there have been several scientific studies done in the last 40 years that have debunked the claim that an extra toe joint makes you quirkless. Third, the indicators that we're seeing from his BLD test indicate that not only does your son have a quirk, it's a fairly powerful one at that, and it has something to do with nature. The diagnostician that works here with an analytical quirk is off on a month-long honeymoon, the man grumbled under his breath here, and Inko managed to make out the words, lucky bstrd, causing her to give a small giggle, so we haven't been able to figure out anything other than that. I would suggest that you either see a specialist or take the little one out to do various activities in nature or spend some time out away from the city, or even just try gardening, anything you can think of that might cause him to begin manifesting some abilities so that we can get his quirk registered as required by law. For now I've left it as an undetermined quirk, with a nature subtype, and it fits both the mutation and emitter classifications. The doctor seemed genuinely pleased at the look of elation on Inko's face as he kept talking and explaining away her worries, especially at the mention of spending time away from the city. Doctor, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You don't know how happy this makes me and will make Izuku. I can't wait to tell him he has a quirk, and it works so well that it's nature-based. We're moving out to the countryside and will be surrounded by nature, and I already plan to have a small garden for the two of us to work on together. Inko was now beside herself with joy, already moving to leave the seat and run to her son to surprise him with the news when the doctor stopped her with a clearing of his throat and a wave of his hand. She sat back down with a confused look on her face at that and waited for him to explain himself. Ma'am, might I suggest you not spoil the secret so quickly? It might make your son happier to discover he has a quirk on his own. He flashed a warm smile her way and adopted a conspiratorial grin as he leaned towards Inko. After all, he's told me so much about how he likes to analyze quirks, how do you think he'll react to having the ability to analyze his own? Inko returned his grin with one that she'd find more often than not on her best friend Mitsuki's face and agreed with the man before making her way back out to finish the discharge paperwork and collecting Izuku and his bag. She began walking him out to the cab she had called a few minutes ago and helped Izuku get in and buckled up and watched his face form a look of growing confusion and curiosity before he finally turned to her and asked, were we not going home right away, adding the little head tilt at the end that she and her group of mom friends had decided was illegally cute. We are going home, sweetheart, we don't live at that apartment anymore, I found us a new place to stay and I can't wait to show you around. Inko poked his chubby little cheeks at this, causing him to let out a giggle that was music to her ears. The two sat and talked about anything Izuku wanted to talk about, but Inko refused to answer any questions about their new home or when he was going back to school. Eventually the taxi pulled over at the train station and the family of two got out, grabbed their things, and Inko led her curious son over to the ticket booth and then onto the train that they only had to wait a few minutes for. Inko sat Izuku down beside her and gave him one of his notebooks to keep him occupied while she settled into her seat to pore over more information on her phone that Detective Tsukachi had been updating her with over the course of the investigation. The two sat in relative silence, broken only by Izuku asking random people nearby about their quirks and scribbling in his notebook about any super cool quirks. Spoiler, it was all of them, until Izuku fell asleep curled up in Inko's lap. The 4-hour train ride eventually came to an end when Inko heard the automated voice calling out the name of her stop, and she picked Izuku up and did her best to carry him off the train without waking him up. She managed to call for a taxi and get Izuku buckled into his seat and halfway to their new home when he woke up and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. His head began swiveling as he took in his surroundings outside of the car, seeing so much open space that he wasn't accustomed to, and just as he was about to ask her what she could tell would be many questions, she watched him grind to a halt. Sensing something was wrong, she curled her fingers around his shoulder and brought him closer to her. "What's wrong, baby?" she asked, hoping to prompt him into talking. It's nothing, Mom. I was just wondering if it was my fault that we had to move. Izuku said while doing the best his 6-year-old body could do not to cry in the taxi. Even as young as he was, he knew how much he cried and didn't want to ruin the nice man's car. Inko had to exercise a lot of self-control to not bring both hands to her mouth and do exactly what Izuku was trying his best not to do. After a few moments to collect herself again, she responded to him in as calm and gentle a voice as she could muster. "Izuku, sweetheart, it's not your fault that we moved. You were having to deal with something that no one your age should deal with, actually no one of any age should have to deal with it. You are so strong, but I wish you had told me what was happening before. I could have gotten you out of that situation much sooner. You don't need to take all of the burden alone. You're my baby boy and you are only 6. You are smart, so smart, but you don't know how things are supposed to be fixed yet. It's not your fault, and if I remember what you wrote in that notebook correctly, you have always done everything you could to do the right thing, even when it got you in trouble with everyone around you. I am proud of everything you have done and I want you to keep doing everything you have been doing so far, but please don't hide things from me anymore. I promise you that I won't think you or your problems are a bother. You're all I have and I won't let you suffer alone like that ever again." She punctuated the statement with the warmest hug she could give him while sitting next to each other. Luckily for the driver, they had reached their destination and he, thankfully, wouldn't have to deal with the water damage that was about to be inflicted on his car. He got out of the car and helped the young mother and her son out and got their luggage from the trunk, giving Inko a good-natured nod and smile before leaving after she declined his help in bringing the bags and suitcases inside. She looked at Izuku, who was now whipping his head back and forth trying to take in everything about the house in front of him. All things considered, it was much larger than their apartment, the perks of the reduced housing costs in the countryside, and the large fenced-in front yard which wrapped around both sides of the house, transitioning from the wooden picket fencing out front to the chest-high, for Inko, white concrete walls that led to the backyard. His eyes widened as he took in the house itself, a large white home with a covered top front porch held up by wide, sturdy pillars and framed by uninhabited planting beds just under the windows spaced out over the face of the structure. His eyes ran up, head tilting back as they continued sliding further and further up, seeing the second story and the high roof with the chimney poking up out of the left side and multiple windows that looked like they might open outwards and upwards to allow hot air to escape in the summer or be closed to let the sun warm the attic in the winter. So engrossed in what he was seeing as he didn't register the look of relief that flooded Inko's face as she watched him looking over the place, not sure what she'd do if he didn't like the house she picked out for them. She was so focused on his apparent acceptance of the new place that she didn't react instantly when he turned to her with stars in his eyes. "We get to live here now. This place is so big and we have a yard now. Can we go around back or wait? No, we should go inside. Izuku in all his excitement flew into one of the Midoriya mutter storms. She will get that trademarked, she doesn't know how yet, but it's so cute that she'll find a way, before he could stop himself, and she let him go on until he needed to take a breath before she cut in to stop him from continuing. "Yes, Izuku, we live here now, and there's a bigger yard out back that I can't wait to show you, but we really should get our stuff put inside and maybe get something to drink first before I give you the big tour." She gave him a smile that he matched, and suddenly everyone in the new town felt the need to shield their eyes, and even though they didn't know why, they knew that everything was too bright. The boy jumped up and down and grabbed a bag in each hand before running to the door, dropping them off carefully, and running back to help with more of the bags. Inko chuckled and laughed at his eagerness, knowing that he was already happier than she had seen him in months. "Maybe tomorrow you could help me plant a few things, some flowers for the planting beds here in the front under the windows, and maybe a small garden for us out back." She did want to add some more life and color to the place, as it was mostly just the blue shingled roof on a white house with a green front yard, not exactly something that screamed lived into her, and she could cross off one of the suggestions from the doctor if Izuku's quirk didn't respond to planting the garden as he had mentioned. She could only give another gushing smile when he turned his megawatt toothy grin on her again while nodding his head so fast she was almost worried he'd toss it off his shoulders. Good, let's get this put away then. The next day Inko made sure to get the map for the town they lived in now downloaded and saved to her phone and had the app open so that she could make use of the GPS function before she led them both out on a 20-minute walk to the closest store that looked like it might be a nursery. She was pleasantly surprised when it turned out that she was right and the young man behind the counter greeted them with a bright smile and asked if he could help them find anything. Inko took up her thinking pose, back straight, one arm holding the other up to cup her chin and tapping her middle finger while she considered what she wanted while thinking of how best to do this in a way that might show her what Izuku's quirk could be. Could you please show us the seeds for the seasonal vegetables and some assorted flowers, seedlings for a few bushes, and saplings for a couple of native fruit trees? I want to get a variety for a home garden, some color in our front yard, and have some fruit trees that we can pick from in several years. She listed off what she wanted and why without falling into a mutter storm of her own, a result of years of practice and many embarrassing secrets being shared accidentally. The two Midoriyas followed the young man through the store taking his recommendation for nearly every plant introduced to them and writing down the care instructions for everything that they eventually purchased and set up a time for DLVRY so they could go get their groceries. Walking to the nearest grocery store was another 10-minute trek through the small town with many people greeting them and asking if they were new to the area, something to get used to with everyone knowing everyone else when the population density was so low to be sure. They explored the grocery store and picked out all of the essentials for the next week including ingredients for Izuku's favorite Kaachan, though Inko didn't tell him that yet, keeping it as a surprise for him in case he fell into another depressive funk later. The walk back home was uneventful if heartwarming with all of the locals continuing to greet them and initiate small talk, including a woman with shoulder-length light brown hair that seemed to lift itself slightly holding hands with a girl around Izuku's age that looked remarkably similar to the woman, but with little pads on her fingers and small round blush marks on her cheeks. Inko and the woman, Uraraka Hoshi, hit it off very quickly over their shared love of their children and each tried to seem like they weren't watching their children as the little girl, Ochako was her name. Lovely name Inko thought, shuffled up to the shy Izuku and tried to strike up a conversation. Hi, I'm Uraraka Ochako. Nice to meet ya. I don't remember you from school, what class are you in? Ochako rattled off with the brightest smile Inko had seen on any child that wasn't Izuku. Speaking of Izuku, the poor boy could barely get out a few choked noises for several seconds before finally getting his mouth to start working. Hello. I am Midoriya Izuku. And nice to meet you too. My mom and I just moved here yesterday and I haven't been to the new school yet. Inko was proud of his stutter slowly going away the longer he talked to the girl. Hopefully he could make a new friend that seemed very nice so far. Oh, so you're new here. Where do you live? Can I come play? The little girl's eyes lit up with stars while her mother chuckled and whispered conspiratorially to Inko, do you mind setting up a play date sometime? I think she might start a riot if I tell her no at this point. Inko joined her with a whispered, if she wants to play she can come over any time. Izuku won't be starting school for another week while we adjust to the new place so you and your daughter are welcome any time, though we will be planting today when we get home. She quickly checked her watch, do you have anything planned around 3? We should be done planting the bushes and flowers in the front yard by then and they can run and play in the backyard. I think Izuku would love to have a new friend so soon after moving and you can both stay for dinner if you like. Don't tell him but we're having Kaachan, it's his favorite. If we wouldn't be a bother, I don't see a problem with that at all. My husband will be working until late anyway tonight so it gives us something to do besides strolling around town or being cooped up in the house. Hoshi said with a gentle smile holding out her hand for Inko to shake. Grabbing the hand she was offered Inko returned the smile, you wouldn't be a bother at all, Izuku hasn't had a good history with his friends where we used to live so I want him to have someone he can trust as soon as possible. Who knows, if they remain friends we might be closer in the years to come, I know I need more people my age to interact with. My best friend is currently unable to be physically present in our lives, so I'd like some time to chat and maybe get to know you. I think we can work something out. We seem to be heading in the same direction. Shall we follow you home so that we know where to go when 3 o'clock rolls around? Hoshi says as she starts walking again, making sure to clasp her daughter's hand in hers while the children were still talking. Sure thing, we're not too terribly far away now, just a few more minutes down the road. Inko said as she took Izuku's hand in hers and started walking with, hopefully, the new family friends. Soon after the four of them arrived at the new household and the Urarakas bid farewell until the afternoon with both Midoriyas waving goodbye and Izuku shouting that he would see them later. Inko asked for Izuku's help with the groceries quickly before the plants arrived. The two made quick work of the groceries, Inko still hiding the fact that she picked up everything for Kaachan, when they heard a loud horn blaring in the road out front. The two of them hurried out to help unload the truck, and the driver was nice enough to help move the bushes and saplings to where they needed them since they were the heaviest of what was purchased. Inko made sure Izuku gave a sincere thank you to the nice man, and once he'd left they stared at the pots of bushes and bags of mulch and fertilizer, both ready to work hard and get the front yard planted as soon as possible so that they'd have more time with the new possible friends. Inko tried to be as subtle as possible in ensuring that Izuku had a hand in planting everything, from the large pots of camellia to the comparatively tiny dwarf barberry shrubs to the hopefully vibrant flower seeds that were planted based on color patterns that Inko thought might be tasteful. She wanted something to break up the monotony of greens and whites, not a tacky color explosion more fit for a glitter factory floor. Thank you very much. She kept a close eye on Izuku as he struggled to help her lower the bushes into place and pack them back in with topsoil mixed with fertilizer and topped with what was apparently cedar mulch, neither of them knowing if that meant anything, and meticulously placing each seed where she had marked and carefully filling those in while she read off the instructions for each one for optimal growing conditions starting from seed. All in all, they worked and planned and occasionally had to move a bush around after realizing what flowers should be popping up where, but near 2:30 they finished and Inko sent him in to wash up quickly so that he wouldn't be covered in dirt when his new friend arrived. She herself stepping into the shower quickly as soon as he left the bathroom, deciding to take a proper bath later in the evening. She got redressed and started making snacks and tea when she heard knocking at the door. Before she could say anything, Izuku had zoomed to the door and opened it with as much energy as a 6-year-old could muster, which even after spending 4 hours planting a garden was still quite a lot, narrowly avoiding slamming the door into the wall behind it and squealing out greetings to the guests. Inko watched fondly as he told Mrs. Uraraka where to find her and grabbed little Ochako's hand to direct her to the backyard to play. Hoshi too caught up in the fluffy atmosphere to interrupt before moving to the dining room with Inko to watch the children through the large window by the table. He sure has a lot of energy left in him. Did you have the nursery plant everything, or is he just that hyper normally? Ochako has always been energetic, but this might be the first time another child is keeping up with her. Hoshi said while watching the two run around laughing joyfully, displaying an innocence that only children could. He's always been like this. Back when the teachers were still telling me what was going on, they'd always comment on how he was almost always the last to settle down for a nap and kept the other kids on their toes whenever they played outside for recess. I don't know where he gets it from, to be honest. I was never that active as a child, and from what his father told me, neither was he. Inko said after taking a sip of her favorite comfort tea. The mothers sat in comfortable silence for several minutes just watching the kids until they finished the first cups of tea each when Inko asked for Hoshi's opinion on the arrangement out front, both stepping back out the front door and trusting the kids to stick to the backyard and stay safe for a couple of minutes without them. They stepped through the cobble and slate path towards the front gate to take a better look while Inko held out the map they'd plotted with each different type of flower and shrub and was so engrossed in fiddling with it that she didn't hear when Hoshi gasped beside her. She definitely felt the tap to her shoulder afterwards though. I don't think you're going to need the map to tell me where everything is, Inko, Hoshi commented while staring ahead and leaving her mouth wide open. Inko gave an inquisitive hum while turning back to see what she meant. Suddenly Hoshi's silence made much more sense. Both women watched as flowers by the dozen sprung up out of the soil and began to bud and blossom before their eyes, bushes growing to fit the area they had set aside for them and flowers popping up along the foliage right after. It was fascinating, appealing, entrancing, and suddenly it stopped. The flowers all vibrantly colorful, the bushes grown to the perfect size, even the fragrance was hitting them now, it was intoxicating. They felt like they were watching something straight from a fairy grove and couldn't look away until they heard Ochako shouting for them from in the house. Both mothers were startled from their stupor and ran back inside towards the back door where they found a clearly distressed little girl trying to pull an unresponsive Izuku towards the house. They rushed in to find out what happened, Hoshi checking on Ochako and asking for information while Inko made sure Izuku was still breathing. She lost all the built-up tension in her shoulders when she realized that he was just sleeping, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest signaling that he wasn't in danger right now, and picked him up to move him back inside while Ochako struggled to tell her mother what caused this. She still managed to pick up what the little girl was saying once she calmed down enough to talk through the tears, and her mother had picked her up to move her inside as well. "We were just playing tag and he was asking about Miq Quirk. He just stopped talking and fell over. I don't know why. Is he okay mommy?" The poor girl was distraught, and Inko wasn't going to let her sit there and blame herself, not when she finally managed to calm down enough to remember that this was likely just a side effect of Izuku's quirk, his plant growth. Quirk. She'd have to do some research on that later, for now a crying little girl needed reassurance. "It's okay Ochako sweetie, I think he just got tired because his quirk finally manifested for the first time. You did nothing wrong and he should be fine in a little while." She watched as the girl slowly turned her head towards her with confusion growing visibly on her face through the tears, which had thankfully stopped. "But Izuku said he was quirkless, did he fib?" "I don't like fibbers," she said while clenching her fist in front of her towards the couch Inko had laid him down on. Honestly, it was adorable and Inko didn't blame the girl. She was a bit surprised that his quirkless status had already come up in conversation between the kids, but she'd ask about that later. "No sweetheart, he didn't fib. He was told shortly after his 4th birthday by a doctor that he was quirkless. He's been bullied a lot because of it, and it's part of the reason we moved here, to get him far away from his tormentors. The thing is, he got hurt really badly just before we left, and when we were at the hospital another doctor asked for details on his quirk, a quirk we didn't know he had. The doctor said it had something to do with plants, so I kept it a secret from him and had him help me plant all those bushes and flowers you saw when you got here out front. I was going to keep trying different things with plants until I either figured out what his quirk was able to find a specialist with an analysis quirk to tell us directly, or exhausted every option and accept that the first doctor was right and Izuku really was quirkless." Inko explained while looking directly in the little girl's eyes and pointedly ignoring Hoshi's gasps and distressed looks while she listened in. "So he's not quirkless. Why didn't you tell him that? He seems to really like quirks, I think he'd want to know if he had one." Ochako yelled, seemingly trying to stick up for her new friend and endearing herself more to the Midoriya matriarch in the process. "I didn't want to get his hopes up again in case we couldn't figure it out. He's already had the bad news given to him once by a really mean doctor, I didn't want him to have to go through it again. But now we know. He grows plants, would you like to see what he did? We can show him later together when he wakes up." Inko made every attempt to stick an excited look on her face, didn't take much as she was quite excited, and explained her reasoning to the little girl in front of her while holding out her hand so she could lead her out to see what Izuku had done. "Oh. Okay then, yeah. Let's go see what Izuku made." Ochako yelled while dragging her mother and Inko to the front door with her, Hoshi reaching forward to grab her and hold her tightly to her side and motioning for Inko to cover Ochako's eyes so they could surprise her with the whole view instead of her getting a spoiler as she ran out the door. Chuckling at the gesture, she complied with the other mother and they moved outside while preventing the little one from seeing anything too soon. When they reached the fence gate and turned around, Inko removed her hand from Ochako's eyes when Hoshi gave the signal, and they both watched the wonder on the child's face as she was now taking in the colors and all the different types of flowers that popped up since she had gotten there. "Wow! So pretty!" Ochako squealed in glee, hopping down from her mother's arms and running over to get a closer look and freeing her mother to question Inko further. "So, you didn't know your son had a quirk?" Hoshi asked. "No, his previous pediatrician quirk specialist told us he was quirkless because he had the extra toe joint." I don't think he ran any other tests and it irked me, so I did some research. That method has been outdated for the last 50 years. To think he turned my little boy into the shy ball of anxiety that you met when he used to be so outgoing and always eager to meet and talk to new people. Inko said while doing breathing exercises to calm the rage that boiled up upon remembering Dr. Tsubasa. I have lodged a complaint against him and the hospital he worked at. He nearly ruined my son's life because he was too lazy to run a BLD test. She almost succeeded at keeping her tone steady and not popping a vein on her temple. That's horrible. I hope you get some sort of compensation for that, and at least now Izuku won't have to deal with the stigma any longer. I'm sure his outgoing nature will make a return in time now that he won't be dealing with people picking on him for his lack of a quirk, not that I ever understood why that was such a big deal. My own quirk is kind of useless for almost anything and my husband's is useful but not terribly so outside of our profession. Speaking of husbands, do you have one, and if you do, where is he? Hoshi displayed her innate supportive nature and did her best to lighten the mood a bit with what she thought were pretty safe questions. Inko sighed at the last question but decided to go in order. I'm being told we'll receive a small payout for the school supplies he's lost to bullying, another small payout for medical malpractice, a slightly larger payout for emotional duress, and was told that his previous doctor would have had his license revoked but he is no longer practicing and has moved away. No one knew where to though, so I couldn't complain to him directly. As far as my ex-husband goes, I hope to never see him again after I caught him with his co-worker. She fumed again at the reminder of her adulterer ex-husband but was able to put away the distressing memories quickly when she noticed Ochako running back to them, so she turned her full attention on the little girl. Mommy, do you know when Izuku is going to wake up? It doesn't feel fair that he hasn't gotten to see what he made yet. Ochako said in a raised voice while bouncing up and down and a small pout on her face. Apparently her raised voice was just loud enough to rouse a certain sleepy boy who staggered into view holding the door frame for support and looking at them with bleary eyes, clearly not quite awake yet. Ochako noticed him and shouted his name while she ran over to help him outside to see what he did. It might be that he was still not awake enough to process anything Ochako was saying to him just yet, but he allowed her to help him drag his feet over to the two adults until he got close enough for Inko to pick him up and turn him away from the plants quickly, wanting to surprise him when he finally became awake enough to realize what was going on around him. Izuku, sweetie, you in there yet? Inko couldn't hold back her chuckle at the clearly still mostly asleep boy in her arms struggling to get a grasp on the land of the living again. His quirk really did a number on him. We need to figure out how exactly it affected him later. Time to watch something that should have happened 2 years ago. Inko pumped herself up mentally and emotionally for this one. Are you following me here, sweetie? Nod once if you can hear me. A slow nod from her baby boy signaled that while tired he was, indeed, listening to her, and she took a deep breath. Izuku, do you remember Dr. Tsubasa? An instant frown followed almost immediately by a grimace answered that question. Do you remember how he told you that you were quirkless? Tears started flowing while his face morphed into a pained expression that she never wanted to see on her son's face again, and she was sure this was going to be a big step in that direction. Izuku. He lied. The tears didn't stop altogether, but they did slow down to a crawl while his expression turned from dejected sadness to inquisitive curiosity, still marred by a sense of depression and exhaustion. He told us that you didn't have a quirk based on an extra toe joint. Izuku nodded to show he remembered. That test was disproved 50 years ago. His eyes widened to nearly comical proportions at this, but he couldn't get actual words past his lips, just stuttered, muttering so far. I'm going to show you something, all right. I just wanted to make sure you were ready beforehand, sweetheart. Inko said, watching as he gave a nearly imperceptible nod while still making incomprehensible noises with mostly unfocused eyes. She sighed and thought to herself, this is probably the best I'm going to get for the next hour. Oh well, I've waited long enough for this, and I know he has too, before slowly turning around, making sure Izuku's gaze was pointed straight forward to see the freshly planted front yard that he himself helped put together over the last few hours. The effect was nearly instantaneous. His face froze up entirely. She was honestly a little worried because she noticed he had stopped breathing, so she bounced him once softly to reboot his system, so to speak. He took a deep breath, mouth left hanging open for several seconds before she reached up to close it for him, which he invalidated shortly after by letting it fall open again. She then watched in exasperation when he reached for his thigh and pinched himself, wincing painfully. He could have just given himself a light pinch, before his face reflected the realization his mind must be going through right then. He probably just proved to himself that he was awake, which means 5 4 3 2 Awawan. What? What? How? I don't know much about plants but they don't grow that fast, alright. Izuku, of course, went through his checklist starting with blaming his own lack of knowledge, a smart thing to start with. It reminded Inko just how intelligent he was despite his age. Is this the Q quirk of one of the people from the place we bought these from? Step 2, blaming someone else. But then how did it not take effect until now? Step 3, removing inconsistencies. But your quirk is moving small things. Oh, that one wasn't expected. Repeating steps 2 and 3 again. He might ask Hoshi about her quirk if that's the CAI. Is this why your quirk, Uraraka-san? Earning a shake of the head and a gentle smile but no verbal responses from the other adult, Inko would have to thank her later for allowing him to work through this on his own. But Ochako-chan said her quirk W was 0g gravity so that means, here it comes. Thought Inko, seeing the anticipation on the faces of the other two people watching her boy come to the only possible conclusion at last. This I did this. I did this. I did this. I did this. I have a quirk. I have a quirk. Mama havia quirky havia quirklukatsapratimikirk gritheflowers. Izuku began shouting, rocking back and forth in her arms rapidly enough that she felt safe enough to set him down on his own feet where he stood rooted to the spot, his smile growing to cover nearly all of the space it possibly could on his face, his big eyes growing more and more expressive by the nanosecond. Inko watched as her son's face lit up like the sun, bringing forth a visage of pure and innocent happiness that she hadn't seen him make since before his diagnosis 2 years ago. Eventually she will be following up in any way she could about that untraceable doctor, but she threw that train of thought into the sun for now. She instead reached for her phone and began recording Izuku, unhappy that she didn't think to do so earlier before feeling a tap on her shoulder and moving her gaze to Hoshi, who was already holding her phone up, seemingly having been recording the entire time. How did she miss that? Hoshi herself leaning in to whisper that she would send her the video afterwards. Inko beamed at her new friend before turning to the sound of her son singing to his new friend about his new quirk while holding her hands in his, bringing a giggle up from the depths of her diaphragm on seeing the two children jumping in circles shouting about Izuku's new quirk. This is a good day, she thought, and couldn't wait to watch Izuku when he inevitably remembered that he could now spend time analyzing his own quirk. Speak of the devil, he just started shouting about wanting to know what all he could do, and Inko was elated. Gonna have to tell Mitsuki about this one. Chapter 3, Bright Revelations and Budding Relationships. After an eventful afternoon visit from the new friends of the family, the time spent mostly enjoying watching Izuku try to break down what his quirk might be capable of, and Inko having called to make an appointment at the local quirk specialist's clinic, Inko could tell how tired her son was after everything that happened. She got him to go clean up before bed and made sure he was tucked in before she left the room and grabbed her phone, making sure to save the video Hoshi sent to her. She really didn't know how she didn't notice her filming from the moment he showed up at the door frame, before shooting a copy of it over to Mitsuki with the promise of lots of punishment if she said anything about it to Katsuki. She watched as the indicator changed from sent to seen, and set her phone aside for the few minutes that she knew her bombastic gal pal would spend watching the short video, waiting for the notification of a reply. She didn't wait long. Me, file, exciting news. MP6 sent Yappy Pom Pom Beach. Oh, Izu got his quirk. OMG, he looks so happy and that little girl is adorable. Me, I know, right? Look at her little cheek blushes. They're permanent. She's also got these little pad things that look a lot like toe beans on her fingertips. Makes things float when she touches them. She's also fiercely protective of Izuku, and they've only known each other for a couple of hours. Yappy Pom Pom Beach, it's great that he's got a friend already in a new place. Have you figured anything out about his quirk or his education? Mie, so far we know he can accelerate the growth of plants, don't know the conditions yet but we have an appointment for the local quirk specialist tomorrow. He'll be starting school in a week. Yappy Pom Pom Beach, that's a nifty quirk, at least you'll never have to worry about having a nice yard. Do you know if it works on fruit trees or vegetables yet? Would save you a lot of money on food costs. Mie, we're going to try it out in the morning. When his quirk activated today it knocked him out cold. He was out for nearly 20 minutes while we were trying to calm his new friend down. I think maybe his quirk tried to grow too many things at once and it looked like he might use his own stamina as a fuel source to speed up the growth or something similar. Anyway, we'll be planting part of the vegetable garden and some fruit trees we picked out today after breakfast so that if he gets knocked out again we'll have plenty of time for him to wake up and get cleaned up for the appointment at noon. Yappy Pom Pom Beach, awesome. Hey, if his quirk does work on fruits and veggies, mind sending some to me every once in a while. It'd be nice to get some produce from somewhere I know isn't spraying them down with pesticides. Mie, depends on how bad his drawback is. If he knocks himself out growing a few cucumbers then we're going to be waiting on trying to produce enough food using his quirk for ourselves, let alone anyone else. Might have to wait for him to build up his stamina a bit more. Never thought I'd ever consider Izuku lacking in stamina, that child doesn't stop running around ever. Yappy Pom Pom Beach, I noticed that too. He might not be the fastest but he just doesn't stop. Hey. That's something you can bring up to the doc in your visit. If his quirk uses his stamina like you think it does, maybe it also helps him build up his stamina to better utilize the growth aspect of the quirk. I remember one of our clients mentioned her daughter had a similar quirk that used her stamina to produce these spirals energy beams, and she said that as her daughter uses her quirk she increases her overall stamina at the same time. Mie, oh, I hope that's how it works. I was thinking I might have to put him into all sorts of sports to build stamina to have a hope of being able to use his quirk the way he wants. He spent all afternoon brainstorming ways to use his quirk for heroics. I know I wasn't entirely supportive of his dream beforehand, but if he can prove to me he can use his quirk to stay safe I'll be backing him up from now on. Yappy Pom Pom Beach, hey. Don't blame yourself too much, you were just a worried mother trying to keep your boy safe. It wouldn't have been so bad if the flaming pile of garbage was actually a decent person parent and helped support you too that day. Anyway. Keep me posted with updates on Izu's new quirk. I'm going to head off to watch a show with Masaru since it's quiet in the house now that the brat isn't screaming every 10 seconds. Anger management and therapy have been so good even for the short time he's been forced to take them. Mie, he's actually sitting through them. Color me surprised. Yappy Pom Pom Beach, well, the first couple sessions he was insufferable, but by the fourth time his therapist managed to break through his thick skull that he was being the opposite of heroic. He has been mellowing out now that we got him to understand that if you had wanted to he'd never have been allowed to pursue the career he wants because of everything he's done so far. Mie, I'll be honest, I wanted to. I really wanted to. That's not even the worst thing I wanted to do to him when I first read everything he's said and done to Izuku since he was diagnosed quirkless. I won't go into details, but you are perfectly aware of how scarily broad the term small objects is at this point. I'd never physically hurt Katsuki, but the thought did cross my mind. Yappy Pom Pom Beach, thanks for that. I'd like to fix my boy up and not have him turn into whatever would be left over after you got to him. Anyway, the show is starting, I'll talk to you later, okay? Mie, go spend time with that saint of a husband of yours. Still haven't figured out how he has the patience to deal with you and Katsuki. Yappy Pom Pom Beach, har har, very funny. He is amazing though. Waving emoji. Mie, waving emoji. Setting her phone aside, Inko checked the time, stretched, and got up to prepare some food for the next day. Kaachan was nice every once in a while and Izuku loved it dearly, but you needed more than pork cutlets over rice for a complete diet, something Izuku would probably deny with every fiber of his being. Once she had finished up in the kitchen, she decided to head to bed to get an earlier start in the morning. She too was full to bursting at the seams with curiosity as to what Izuku's quirk was capable of and wanted to get to work helping him figure it out. The next day, Izuku's first coherent thought today was a simple one. Something smells good. Moving more on instinct than anything else, the boy appeared in front of his mother as she was putting the finishing touches on breakfast. A lot of breakfast. Mom. Izuku said, looking at the sheer volume of food on the table. Why is there so much food? Were you expecting someone over for breakfast? Inko chuckled at that. No, sweetie. The food is mostly for you. Izuku balked at that. I know it looks like a lot, but your Auntie Mitsuki and I got to talking last night and we had an idea that your quirk might use your own stamina as fuel. So I decided to make you a big breakfast so that we can go out and test it out with the veggies and the fruit trees before we go over to the quirk specialist later today. Izuku didn't know if he could eat all of this, but if his mom said it would help his quirk, then he was going to give it his all. Okay, Mom. I'll eat as much as I can and then we'll go out and see what I can do. He then proceeded to eat far too fast and required the help of his mother to clear his windpipe several times. He wouldn't tell her how many times he felt like throwing up either, but he did manage to cram everything she gave him down his throat. Mie trying to jump out of his chair to run out the door wasn't the best idea after having eaten what felt like half his body weight in just a few minutes, but he was excited. He managed to hobble jog to the back door while his mom put their bowls in the sink and followed him out the door. Okay, Mom, where do I start? He was lightly bouncing on his feet now, full tummy and all. First, we're going to make sure our leafy greens are taken care of. I put the seed pouches at the end of each row for you and you just need to put the seeds in the holes I left last night. I'm going to plant a few as well so we can tell if your quirk works on things planted near you or if you need to be the one planting them. Inko explained as she walked around the freshly tilled and weeded plot she had readied before bed the night before, pointing out where Izuku would need to pay attention as she went. Okay. I've got this. Izuku shouted before grabbing the bag of what looked like lettuce seeds and began putting a seed in every little mound and covering them as he went, accompanied by the thought that he couldn't wait to taste the super healthy and tasty stuff that grew. This went on until Inko stopped him to plant 3 seeds herself at the very end of the row, and they repeated the process for each different type of seed, until the backyard was nearly entirely planted. They had been taking 10-minute breaks after every 3 rows, trying to find out how often his quirk activated, and had worked a full hour since starting that first row of lettuce when Izuku stumbled. Izuku, honey. What's wrong? Did you trip on something? Inko called out to him when she saw him face plant in the dirt. Honestly, if she wasn't so worried about him, she could have admitted to herself that it was very funny. He had been walking to the next section, one leg lifted to take his next step but never coming down to catch himself as he continued forward. Underneath all the concern, she had the funny thought come to mind: Izuku. EXE has crashed, and it took more effort than she was willing to admit to not immediately break down into giggles after she helped him back to his feet, pleased that he didn't pass out this time. I think I'm fine. I got super tired there for a second and it felt like I just stopped. I feel a lot better now though. Maybe you were right about Festamana being Gafuel Sorcian. Izuku had started trying to reassure her before launching into an impromptu mutter storm about what he thought happened. Inko was perfectly content with letting him keep mumbling since he was standing still while doing so, and she wasn't worried about another fall. So maybe me still digesting breakfast and the foot is giving memoriner overtime. Those are great theories, sweetheart, but are you sure you're okay to continue? We can stop here and go rest before the appointment, there's no rush. We have the whole week to ourselves before you need to start at the new school. Inko said, obviously trying to prevent her boy from overworking. No. I feel fine now, Mom. I want to keep going until we finish what you had planned for testing today before anything else. Izuku rushed to make her understand that he didn't want to stop. He barely felt tired anymore, in fact, and he definitely wasn't trying to change the subject away from the new school, definitely not. He ran to the next row and started planting the next type of vegetables, leeks, and got almost to the end of the row before he almost fell again. He managed to catch himself this time though, and he was able to play it off as him just tripping over his own feet in his enthusiasm. The vegetable garden done, they moved to the fruit trees and checked the map again for where they should go, Inko having purchased a lot of land to go with the house since it was quite cheap and she was already starting to receive payments from the multiple lawsuits she was allowing the least offensive people to settle out of court with her. Those along with the medical malpractice insurance payments she was getting had allowed her to buy out the land around the hill behind the house. It would be useful for tiered fruit tree planting, possibly even some rice if she can convince a few locals to help her prepare the paddy fields. It didn't take long before they'd finished planting the saplings and were back to the chairs set up outside the back door relaxing for a few minutes and admiring their handiwork. It was a quiet hour or so of relaxing chatter, with Izuku feeling that same moment of weakness several times every few minutes, this time telling his mother about it so that she didn't worry when he suddenly stopped talking back to her a few times. They were getting ready to go back inside to have a bath and get ready to go since he hadn't felt that feeling again for the last 10 minutes or so when it happened. Izuku nearly passed out, the feeling so much stronger now than it had been while they were working but not as bad as yesterday, so he managed to stay awake and boy was he glad he got to see this. It was like watching a video of all of the plants growing over the course of weeks in just a few seconds. Sprouts shot up out of the ground, vines crawling up trellises with flowers appearing sporadically across the plants that grew their vegetables from the flower buds, large heads of lettuce, vibrant radish and carrot greens fanning out to take up as much space as was available, the pumpkins starting to grow until they were half as big as he was. Glancing out to the hills saw trees rocketing up in growth, standing taller than the ones he had seen on the pictures when they were selecting which ones they wanted to plant. Everything they just planted had grown to maturity in just 10 seconds, everything except what his mother had planted, that is, which seemed to have not grown at all. The two of them watched in fascination as this happened, unable to say anything or look away at all. Once the growth had stopped they spent the next few minutes staring out over the nearly baseball field-sized garden that looked like it came straight from a gardening book. Inko was the first to say anything though. Wow. That's a lot of vegetables. Inko then started giggling before she shook her head and whipped around to make sure Izuku was alright, fearing he may have been knocked out again like yesterday, but finding him staring out at the field with an awestruck look on his little face that made her want to pinch his cheeks and film the whole thing. She forgot to film this. Izuku seemed to snap out of his trance and tried to stand up from his lawn chair but was having a lot of trouble getting his legs to hold him up, simply too tired now to do much but unwilling to continue laying back in the admittedly comfy chair when he could be checking out the new plants he just grew with his quirk. He wondered if he'd ever stop feeling so happy about having a quirk of his own. Probably not, but now is definitely not the time to dwell on that happy thought. "Mom, can you help me up? I want to go see the plants up close," he asked. Caught between worrying about the obvious trouble he was having with the simple act of getting up out of the chair, exasperation that he wouldn't just sit still and recover a bit, and her own intense curiosity, Inko picked him up and moved the two of them down the rows, stopping to check each plant at the ends of their rows to inspect for problems and finding none as they kept going. Eventually ending up on the hill in front of a large apple tree, its limbs covered in vibrant green leaves and large shiny red apples, Inko picked one and rubbed it on a clean section of her shirt before taking a bite, much to his dismay as he wanted to try it first. His internal complaint stopped as he felt her freeze up mid-chew, then he watched her eyes as they began to sparkle and she continued at a much faster pace until swallowing her first bite. Amazing. It was all she could think to say, and yet it did absolutely no justice to what she had just eaten. She wasn't even paying attention to the apple anymore as she was trying to come up with a way to describe how good that apple was. In her brief PRD of lacking awareness, Izuku grabbed the apple from her hand and took his own bite. Izuku knew he was young. Knew he hadn't experienced all that much in his short life. Knew there were varieties of even his favorite types of food that he'd yet to try. He also knew now, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that nothing he had ever eaten could come close to how tasty this apple was. Inko, having noticed Izuku had taken the apple from her, reached up for another one and cleaned it off before joining her son in devouring the best piece of fruit she'd ever tried. They both finished their apples at the same time, each holding a core that they couldn't get any more delicious fruit flesh from when they looked into each other's eyes. Each of their heads creaking comically to look back up at the tree and all of the dozens of apples hanging from its branches. "We tell no one," they both said at the same time. causing each other to break down into uncontrollable laughter for several minutes. Inko managing to collect herself and checked her phone for the time, nodding in satisfaction before addressing her son, Izuku, "It's already almost 10. We need to get cleaned up, your appointment is in a little over 2 hours and we're sweaty and dirty. Let's go so we can rest for a bit before we need to leave." Izuku nodded, feeling a lot more energetic now that he'd rested a bit after everything had finished growing and having enjoyed that, in his opinion, magical apple. "Sure thing, Mom. I can't wait to try more of the fruits and vegetables when we get back. If the apple was that good, just think of how good everything else is going to be." The two made their way back inside, preparing for the appointment, and headed out with enough time to be 20 minutes early to the clinic, wanting to make a good impression and hoping to have enough time to fill out any paperwork they needed to do as new clients. They once again felt the welcoming atmosphere, with everyone greeting them and only a few asking why he wasn't in school, most realizing they were new in town and assuming correctly that he hadn't started school yet. It was a good half-hour walk to get there, neither feeling any fatigue from the trip and just content to enjoy the sights when they found the building in question. "Here it is, Mikumi Quirk Clinic. We made good time a whole 5 minutes earlier than I had planned for us to get here," Inko said when they got close enough to read the sign. They walked in, Izuku having held the door open for her like the gentleman he was, and strolled up to the reception desk, picking up the clipboard offered to them and finding a seat to fill everything out and wait for the doctor to call them in. The paperwork was just basic medical information and family quirk history, Inko absently filling in the blanks while Izuku examined the room. It didn't take too long to finish filling out the forms, and only a couple of minutes after that before they heard someone call their names. They followed the receptionist down the hall to a door with a placard on it indicating a Dr. Akatani Mikumi, where they were let in, the door closing behind them. "Ah, you must be the Midoriyas. Welcome. Welcome. I was very interested in your file when they got sent over from Yuzurifu General. It's not very often you get to correct a problem that has been left festering for 2 years. I can't wait to get this all figured out with you both." A tall man with dark hair, yellow eyes with square pupils, clean-shaven face, and a blinding smile, wearing beige khakis, a purple button-up shirt, and a typical white coat addressed them before moving to shake hands. "Hello doctor, yes, we're the Midoriyas. We're here to get Izuku's quirk checked out and registered. We've already done some experimenting since it activated yesterday," Inko informed the man. "Oh. It already came in. Great, this makes things so much clearer." Dr. Mikumi laughed boisterously and then continued, "You see, my quirk analysis is a fairly common one. It allows me to analyze the quirks of anyone I touch. The downside being it doesn't give much information at all for an inactive quirk, and even for an active quirk factor I only get basic information if I don't see it being used in front of me. Can you describe what you think Izuku's quirk does for me so I can get as clear a picture as possible?" "Yes, of course. When we were checking out of the hospital, the doctor in charge of Izuku's recovery mentioned that Izuku's quirk was nature-related, so he suggested we go out and do things like taking long walks in the park or hiking through the woods, or, what we tried first after moving here, planting a garden. We planted flowers and bushes yesterday in the front yard, and within a short period of time they all grew to maturity, but when they first started their explosive growth Izuku passed out while playing in the backyard. So, working on the assumption that his quirk uses his own stamina as a fuel source, I gave him a big breakfast today and we went to work planting the fruit trees and the vegetables in the backyard. We would plant 3 rows then take a 10-minute break. I was hoping to give him time to rest in the hopes of it lessening the effects of what I assumed to be a stamina drain. About an hour into the process he started getting tired briefly every few minutes but seemed to be just fine, and we didn't notice anything going on with what had already been planted yet, so we continued until we got everything we had planned for the day done, including the trees, still taking the 10-minute breaks and Izuku still feeling the draining effect every once in a while. When done we went to relax on some lawn chairs for a little over an hour when he almost passed out again, and we got to watch all of the things we'd planted grow in super speed. Nothing that I personally planted was affected by the quirk though. The apples were delicious, by the way, like, best I've ever tasted. Inko explained as best as she could, the doctor not interrupting her at all, merely typing away taking notes on what she was saying. Okay, that's fantastic. So, I know a few things already just based on that description before using my quirk. Little Izuku here is able to speed up the growth process for plant life that he personally plants. Needs more testing to see if his quirk continues to affect something that's being repotted or moved to a different location. The plants seem to take up as much space as they can safely take up without encroaching on other plant life in the area. The quirk takes roughly an hour to activate, though it seems like it only partially activates if he is still actively seeding more plants, only using a portion of the energy to offset the total amount required, possibly his body's way to prevent an abrupt shutdown like yesterday. Finally, Izuku is using his stamina to either directly grow the plants or as a fuel source to power their growth along with sunlight, nutrients in the soil, and water. We'll know which it is later, after a few more tests. Dr. Mikumi explained, stretching his fingers after his rapid typing, trying to document everything. He then stood and moved to kneel in front of Izuku. Now then, like I mentioned before, my quirk works by touching someone, so with your permission I'll hold your hand for a moment while I get a reading from my quirk to hopefully clear a few things up and get some more information. Then he waited for a response. Izuku was actually surprised he waited for a response before he used his quirk on him. None of the adults he was used to ever asked before using their quirks on him. None of the children did either, though. He looked up into the startled eyes of the doctor and the already watering eyes of his mother before realizing, "Oh, I mumbled that, didn't I?" The two adults nodded their heads. Sorry. I am trying to stop doing that. You can use your quirk though, I know you're not trying to hurt me. Okay, now the doctor was on board with whatever this child's mother needed from him to help this kid. No one should have to go through whatever he did, especially not at his age. Thoughts of homicide aside, he reached for Izuku's hand and activated his quirk. Then he got some information he wasn't expecting. Okay, good news and strange news. Which would you like first, Izuku? He asked with a perplexed but manic grin plastered on his face. Gee, good. I really want some good news. Came the reply after a moment to consider. Alrighty then. So, we got most of our guesses right. Your quirk is the ability to grow plants to meet your needs when you planted them. You are able to generate your own seeds too. Might eat up a bit of extra stamina, but you can. Just be careful when you're making seeds or growing large numbers of plants, especially right now when you've just started using your quirk. You might use up too much stamina and then you'd need to go back to the hospital, and I don't think you want that now, do you? Dr. Mikumi said with a softer smile now that he had more information on the quirk and knew what to mention next. And no. I don't want Mom to worry about me. I'll be super careful. So, if I can grow plants, does that mean I can control them too? That would be so cool. I heard about a woman whose hair was made of grapevines and she used them to help build shelters for wildlife and assist heroes with rescue and relief work. Could I do something similar? Izuku said, enthusiasm growing the longer he spoke. I'm not sure how much control you have over the plants after they're grown. At the very least my quirk didn't mention anything about controlling them after planting them. Izuku's excitement cooled slightly at that. I'm not saying it's not possible, just that my quirk said nothing about it. And it was back and climbing again. Now about the stuff we've guessed wrong or slightly off. Firstly, while your quirk does use your stamina to fuel the plant growth, it does not use the nutrients in the ground. You might be the most eco-friendly plant quirk user on the planet, little guy. Izuku's smile. EXE has expanded in volume. Please install more space on face to display in entirety. Too bright, thought the doctor. Next, you seem to be able to pick and choose if your quirk activates after exactly 1 hour or just whenever you have downtime or are resting. Say you wanted to plant a new flower but didn't have anything else to plant afterwards, you have the ability to speed up its growth instantly as long as you're not still planting more. Dr. Mikumi said, enjoying the expression on Izuku's face while he took in the new information, clearly already wondering how he could work with that. Finally, the stamina use. You convert your stamina to energy for the quirk to utilize, but your quirk also helps you build up your maximum stamina reserves over time. By digesting food your body takes in whatever it needs to function and grow, but instead of getting rid of the rest as waste you instead convert it all to energy which your quirk uses to nourish your body to build you up over time. Kind of like the stockpile type quirks, just not as versatile. Overall, when you use your quirk you're training your body to be able to use your quirk better in the future. You're like a perpetual motion machine for stamina building. Whoa! That's so cool. That means I'll get tired way slower, right? So I can work longer without having to worry about falling asleep in the middle of a job. I think I know how I can build up stamina quickly. Oh, that will help me train really hard too, won't it? Izuku had launched into a spree of questions that he really wasn't expecting anyone to answer, feeling like finding the answers on his own. Doctor, you mentioned some strange news. Inko interjected, hoping to bring Izuku back to the relevant topic, which worked as he was now laser-focused on the doctor again. Yes. So, do either of you know the classification system for quirks? Emitter, transformation, and mutant. Though there's some speculation that there's another type or rather a subtype being called build-up or accumulation quirks. Izuku said before his mother could try to answer, not that she would, as she knew he probably knew more about quirks than 90% of the general public. Exactly. So, normally when a person develops a quirk they fall into one of these categories. Sometimes they might have secondary mutations that help deal with the drawbacks of their quirks, like one of my colleagues mentioned he found a child with an acid quirk that turned their skin a different color as a byproduct of raising the skin's resistance to acids. Sometimes you have secondary mutations based on genetics, like another of my colleagues has a patient who's got the head of a bird but their quirk has nothing to do with their appearance or birds in general. Your doctor at Muzutafu General says you and your mother here have vestigial mutations in your tear ducts that allow for excess tear generation and high-speed ejection of said tears. All of these are secondary or tertiary in nature and have little if anything to do with the original quirk, which means almost all quirks fall into one of those three categories. The doctor paused to make sure both Midoriyas were following what he was saying. Yours, however, is one of the very few we have on record that occupy two of these categories at once. His patient and the young mother across the desk from him, now that he had sat back down, were staring at him in shock. The accelerated growth portion of your quirk is obviously in the emitter category. The stamina build-up portion is part of a mutation. You basically have a core in your body right around your diaphragm that does all the nutrient processing I mentioned before. This would normally be considered a secondary mutation, but in your case that mutation is vital to the use and growth of your quirk, so it's considered a primary attribute. The boy and his mother were still processing the information he gave them when he tilted his head to the side. Oh, and I almost forgot. The emitter portion of your quirk has two outlets, I just don't know what the other one is yet. All information now gathered. The Midoriyas bowed to Dr. Mikumi and thanked him for his time by giving him a basket of apples they had picked before leaving. Izuku bouncing ahead of his mother while she was on the phone asking if Hoshi and her family wanted to try the new produce, and receiving a yes in response, they hurried home to prepare. The lunch and dinner that night with the Uraraka family, including the husband Taiyu, was quite enjoyable. Everything that came from the garden was very well received and the suggestion was made to try selling the produce. After the Urarakas left and as Izuku was going to bed, he noticed his mother on her phone muttering about sales permits. The next day saw Izuku and Ochako playing on the hill behind the house under the watchful eye of Hoshi while Inko went into town to get a permit to sell her produce. When she returned, she asked for help uprooting all of the vegetables so that they could be planted more efficiently for easier picking, promising a hearty lunch for everyone at the end of it all. Having 4 people working on it had sped up the process considerably, and after following the planting map Inko had given him, everything was in the ground with multiple short breaks in between to allow Izuku to stay awake, and everyone moved inside to rest and start making lunch. There was so much produce they could pick from, and the kids were sitting in the living room with a plate of assorted fruit in front of them, enjoying the huge variety they had access to. Izuku felt the big power drain again roughly an hour after the last seed was planted and was given lunch right after experiencing it, mostly mitigating the tiredness he was struck by, but the kids still fell asleep against each other on the couch, tuckered out until dinner time when Taiyu joined them again. Inko's POV. It was nerve-wracking the next day when she got up bright and early to help the people she hired to load up the truck she rented to take produce over to the stall she got permission to set up yesterday in the market square. Everything was crated up and packing in tight though just as Izuku was waking up to join his mother in town. She would never admit to it, but she was hoping to make use of his cuteness to help pull in customers. Once they had arrived, everyone got to work unloading the truck and parking it off in the free parking a few blocks down while the displays were set up. It was only by rushing and tiring herself out that she got everything set up right as the locals started showing up in the square to pick out things for the day's meals. Her totally unplanned weaponization of Izuku's cuteness was working like a charm. They had pulled a large group of locals in who were cooing at the little boy who was fighting hard to stay awake, having been up since 4 with his mother to prepare everything. Eventually a housewife remembered there was produce at the stall too, and she did her shopping before she left, making sure to wave at Izuku on her way back home. This seemed to be a trigger as most of the other people also grabbed a bag of mixed fruits and vegetables. Even with all of the inventory they had brought with them, everything was still gone by the time noon rolled around. Many of the people who had bought something in the early morning had returned for more and cleaned them out. Thanking the ones still hanging around the booth, she told everyone that they would be back in the morning again tomorrow if they wanted to continue doing business with them, and pulled Izuku with her back to the truck, driving it to the rental agency and making sure to request the same people again for the same time tomorrow. This process repeated itself for the remainder of the week, with them accidentally discovering that if they didn't pick the entire plant, the part they harvested would grow back with reduced stamina cost just like normal within an hour. It greatly reduced their workload now that they didn't need to harvest the entire plant and replant everything every day. Izuku even had time to experiment with a tomato plant, seeing if he could grow different color tomatoes. Spoiler alert, he absolutely could, and seeing a rainbow tomato being chopped up and added to the sandwiches they ate for lunch was an interesting experience. The locals had begun talking about their produce now and word had started to spread. Inko was pretty sure that a butler had shown up the day before she had to take a break to bring Izuku to his new school. She felt so lucky that Ochako was going to the same school and could help her look after Izuku and prevent him from being bullied again, that she handed the girl a small bag of mochi when her own mother wasn't looking and held her finger up over her lips to shush the little girl who was gearing up for an appreciative screech. On her way back home she picked up some meat for dinner and was enjoying the peace and tranquility of the countryside when she noticed a very expensive-looking car parked out by her front gate. The same man she thought looked like a butler from the day before, waiting patiently beside the car, giving her a polite bow before opening the door to the back seats. Inko then saw what might be one of the most appealing women on the planet step out of the vehicle before reaching back in to help a small girl who looked very much like her out as well, and started fretting about what could be going on while the pair made their way over to her. "Hello, Mississippi. I am Yaoyorozu Kao and this is my daughter Momo. We apologize for showing up without notice, but our employee brought us some delightful produce that we just had to get more of if at all possible," the now identified woman said, causing Inko to tilt her head to the side and bring a hand to cup her chin, something she picked up from watching Izuku doing his analysis, as she felt the name was familiar. "That shouldn't be a problem. Wait, Yaoyorozu. The support company Yaoyorozu. Where are my manners? Please come inside and I'll get you some tea while we chat," Inko said, realizing who exactly she was talking to pretty quickly and defaulting to being a good host. "Oh. That would be lovely, and please, call me Kao. I'm here not as a businesswoman but as a mother trying to get snacks for her family," Kao said with a smile that radiated a kind of motherly love that Inko could get behind. "Follow me then, Kao-san. We may need to wait a short while to pick anything, so I'll get you that tea and explain our operation here, small as it may be," Inko said while leading the two into her home and towards the couches. Putting a kettle on to boil and preparing her preferred tea leaves for the week. It was a green tea variety, and yes, she would freely admit to picking it this week because of Izuku and Ochako-chan's name pun. "It's surprising that you heard about our produce. We've only just started selling it last week." One of our butlers in charge of procuring food supplies said he had heard a rumor about unbelievable fruits and vegetables being sold in a nearby small town. He decided to follow up on it and found your stall yesterday. Said he tried the sample you gave him and brought home a little of everything for us to try. It was all quite delicious. Momo especially loved the peaches. She paused to chuckle. Ha, I didn't even realize it before dear, Momo loves her momos. Ko then cracked up, unable to keep up her posture or manners at her own little joke. Momo's little face growing red as she pouted indignantly at her mother's antics. Several moments later Ko recollected herself. Apologies, I just caught myself off guard. No trouble, it's nice to see that you have a funny side to go with the whole rich family persona you've got going on. Inko said as she moved the now steeping teacups onto a tray and brought them back to the living room. Here you go, it's nothing special but my son made a new friend recently and their names are a pun of green tea and I just had to have some. We might be able to grow our own tea leaves soon if it turns out that's something he can do. Inko began muttering to herself towards the end there, lost in the possibilities of her son's quirk while the two guests watched her, intrigued by her comments. You want to grow your own tea trees? It might take some time to see any turnover from them. They do take quite a while to establish and begin the process of harvesting, Ko said as she sipped her tea elegantly, Momo mirroring her on her right, but what's this about it being something your son can do? Is he a gardener? Oh, I was muttering wasn't I, Inko said bashfully as she rubbed the back of her head, another thing she'd picked up from Izuku. I guess that's not entirely inaccurate. Izuku's quirk lets him accelerate the growth of plants that he personally plants to suit his needs. He could set up a tea tree grove in a single afternoon and have them reach maturity the same day. I am just not sure how the leaves would turn out as we haven't done much testing with the whole, to suit his needs bit yet. He just manifested his quirk last week after all. The produce we've been selling was just from him testing his new quirk out. Congratulations are in order then. It's always a happy occasion when a child gets their quirk. So your son must have turned 4 recently. He's not much younger than my little Momo. Ko said with a fond look on her face, obviously remembering either her own quirk manifestation or her daughter's. No. Izuku is 6, he'll be 7 in July. He was misdiagnosed and thought he was quirkless until last week. He had to spend some time in the hospital and the attending physician let us know that he had a quirk dealing with nature, so we moved out here partially to help him figure out his quirk as the hospital's analyst on site was on vacation. We planted a garden and the foliage out front the day after we moved here last week and figured out some things about his quirk on our own before seeing the local quirk specialist here in town yesterday. Inko explained. The Yaoyorozu women happy for her and her son at the good news. So you're saying he needs to be here to grow the vegetables and cause the fruit to mature? Ko asked, happy that she could get more of the incredible produce before the end of the day. No, we could harvest it now. Inko said, causing the other woman to gain a confused look. Izuku's plant growth acceleration is passive, it's always being applied to the things he plants. No, the reason I said we might need to wait until later is because his quirk uses his stamina to speed up the growth rates and he's at school. It's a half day today as it's his first day, so he'll be getting out and walking home with his new friend in a couple of hours. In the meantime, would you like to see the garden? We can pick a couple of peaches or apples and it shouldn't affect him too much. Momo's eyes practically sparkled at this. Yes please. I'd love to see the garden and possibly try a fresh peach. She said, placing the teacup on the tray in front of her and bouncing to her feet. The action causing her mother and Inko to coo at just how cute she was being. It would seem my daughter has spoken for us, please if you wouldn't mind we'd love to see the garden. Ko said, placing her own empty cup on the tray and standing up to follow Inko with her now very excited daughter in tow. The trio made their way into the backyard through the kitchen and stopped to see a very well-organized garden with row upon row of carefully made lines of different vegetables, including some of colors the Yaoyorozu matriarch was sure didn't occur naturally. They could also make out the hill just outside of the fenced-in area with several fruit trees dotting the incline. Momo was drawn to one of the trees that seemed to have rainbow were those pears. Rainbow pears. Hanging from its limbs. Inko took her time, showing the two around the garden, explaining what each of the plants were and if they came across one that had been changed by Izuku in some way she'd point that out as well. Her guests were so enthralled looking over some of the altered vegetables that it took a full half-hour to get through the backyard and onto the hill. Seeing the trees took a lot longer as now Momo was making it very difficult to say no to her and getting one of every fruit on the way up. She took special interest in the aforementioned rainbow pears after Inko explained that they were safe to eat and each color tasted slightly different, and the peaches, of which there were several varieties to choose from. Getting the okay from Kao, Inko took down one of each of the pears, apples, and peaches for Momo and settled for an apple for herself and a mango for Kao. Making the 5-minute trek back to the house and into the kitchen, she prepared the fruits for each of them and they settled down to wait for the last 2 hours for Izuku to be home and had a nice chat, Inko making sure to let her guests know that they were welcome at any time, saying she wanted to find more kids around Izuku's age to hopefully help him make more friends since he hadn't had any in a long time. Time passed by quickly with the good company and they were cut off in the middle of a conversation about the legality of running a food vending service out of a residential home by someone knocking on the front door, opening it gently and then a loud scuffling sound as 2 sets of small feet pattered across the floorboards into the living room. "Mom! Miss Inko! We're home here," Izuku and Achiko said, faces covered in bright smiles, before noticing the extra people in the room. "Oh. Sorry for disturbing you. Kaachan and Iw were going to check the garden," Izuku said, his stutter coming back in the presence of strangers. "Yeah, Miss Inko, we're gonna go see the plants and see what else he can grow," Achiko said before bowing to the guests and pulling Izuku down with her. "My name is Uraraka Achiko Midoriya Izuku. Pleased to meet you." "Oh my, what good manners you both have. My name is Yaoyorozu Kao and this is my daughter Momo, she is right around your age," the woman said, prompting the 2 children to turn to her daughter. "Yes, hello, I am Yaoyorozu Momo and if you wouldn't mind I would like to accompany you. I'd very much like to see your quirk in action," Momo said, and anyone looking at her would swear there were sparkles radiating off of her very being at the thought of spending time with people her own age and possibly making new friends. "If it's alright with Inko I don't mind, just don't get hurt and stay nearby," Kao told her girl, content to sit with Inko and talk for a little longer before they would go out and collect some produce with one of their kitchen staff who would be arriving shortly with a van to transport it. Inko watched as all 3 children turned on the puppy dog eyes at her in what could only be described as a critical hit of cuteness before shooing them out the door with a hand wave and turning back to Kao to continue chatting. The kids bolted for the door and made their way to an empty plot. Izuku POV, "Okay Cheiko-chan, what did Kyabakuin say about that plant he wanted to see?" Izuku asked, clearing a section of ground before thinking about it again and grabbing a flower pot and filling it with soil and getting some mulch ready to go on top like the worker said at the flower shop to help keep water in. He said it looked like a tulip but it glowed brightly enough to use as a lamp. Achiko said, a bright smile on her face as she recounted what their classmates said about the flower he bet Izuku he couldn't grow. "Only I don't know what a tulip looks like, do you?" "And no, I don't think I do. Should we go ask Mom for a picture?" Izuku said, trying to think about what to do if his mom didn't know what a tulip was either. "I think I can be of assistance," Momo said, clearing her throat. She pulled up her sleeve and put on a look of intense concentration, a bit of her tongue sticking out without realizing it. Nothing happened for several seconds, and just as Izuku and Achiko were about to ask her what she was doing, sparks of various colors started blossoming out of Momo's forearm until a photo fell off into her waiting hand where she looked at it as if to verify something before nodding her head and flipping the photo over for them to see and saying confidently, "This is a tulip. One of the purple ones. Pretty." Both kids said while staring at her with bright eyes and wide smiles and barely looking at the photo, "Was that your quirk? Do you make printouts of anything you've seen before?" Izuku asked, and Achiko continued, "Those lights were so pretty. Do you make them those colors on purpose, or can they only be like that?" Momo seemed momentarily stunned at the reaction before regathering herself and explaining, "Yes, it was my quirk. No, it's not to print out photos, though I can do that as you just saw, and yes, as far as I've been able to do so far the colors don't change from what you saw just there." My quirk is called creation, and it lets me create anything I want as long as I know its atomic makeup and have enough fat stored up to fuel the process. That's so cool. 2 of the 3 present cinnamon rolls shouted. This time causing Momo to step back from their enthusiasm. She barely managed to stop herself from falling over before Izuku was in her face. Your quirk is so cool. How much can you make at once? How quickly can you make stuff? Can you make things while moving? Can you make things move while being made? How much do you need to eat? He would have kept going too had Ochako not grabbed his hand and tugged on it gently. Remember what Mariko-sensei said about asking too many questions at once, Izuku? She said, pouting a little. Wait for someone to answer a question before you ask another one. He said, back straightened and clearly reciting something from memory. I remember OOH. Sorry Yeo Yoro Yamakan. I shouldn't have asked so many questions at once. I'm trying to do better with that, but it's a habit I've had for as long as I can remember. Izuku said, bowing at the end to hopefully assure the new girl that he wasn't trying to be rude. Yamakan. Is that a nickname? I've never had a nickname before. Momo exclaimed, her whole face brightening up, before turning contemplative, but I think I prefer you to use my given name or maybe Yamamoe. Yeah, that could work. Yamamoe it is. Please take care of me. The now named Yamamoe bowed to the 2 other children, earning a giggle from them before they all began laughing. The photo landing on the ground mostly forgotten until Izuku leaned forward and grabbed it. So. This is a tulip. I think I can make this. I mean, it already exists, right? How hard could it be to make something that already exists? Izuku said, psyching himself up for the coming task. Oh, right, Kaachan. Could you grab me an apple to eat for when I make the seed and try to grow it? Ochako nodded, then turned on her heel and started running as fast as her tiny legs could carry her, shouting back at them, sure thing Izuku. Don't start without me, I'll be right back. Izuku and Momo watched her run towards the hill, Izuku knowing that she was going to use her quirk to get the apple and Momo assuming she knew how to climb trees. Momo turned to look at Izuku and took in everything about him that she could, eager to learn more about her new friend but too shy to start asking him anything. She was still staring at him when he finally turned to her. Yamamoe. What do you want to do when you grow up? I want to be a hero just like All Might. Izuku said. Determination burning in his eyes as he spoke. Momo had never thought about her future before. She was always so busy with studying everything she'd need to know to use her quirk and making sure that she excelled in all of her private classes that she'd never had time to consider what she'd use all of that knowledge for when she became an adult. She would need to think about it for now, and she told her new friend, she had friends now. As such. That's okay, Yamamoe. You don't need to know about it right now. We're 6. We have lots of time to think and plan and get ready for our dreams. Now let's see about this tulip thing. Izuku said, trying to encourage his new friend, he had friends now. And get back to what they came out to do now that he could see Kaachan coming back into the yard waving at them. Okay. So it's a small, black, oval-shaped seed. It grows up to look like one of these.